The journey into the camp begins long before the gates come into view. It starts in the mind, shaped by months and years of fear, by the steady accumulation of stories whispered between prisoners, civilians, and the displaced. For her, captivity is not an abstract condition but a lived expectation, sharpened by everything the war has taught her about power. Uniforms mean control. Guards mean cruelty delayed, not denied. Camps exist to break people, not merely to hold them. This belief is not paranoia but logic, built from observation and survival. As the transport slows and the compound emerges from the landscape, she prepares herself for what she believes must come next. The camp appears orderly, almost restrained, which only deepens her unease. There are fences and watchtowers, but no chaos, no shouting. The structures stand in straight lines, the ground is kept clear, and movement is deliberate rather than frantic. This is not the disorder of a place overwhelmed by hatred, nor the brutality of a system operating on impulse. It feels controlled, measured, and therefore unreadable. She has learned to fear unpredictability, but this calm presents a different threat, the possibility that cruelty here will be systematic rather than explosive. As she is processed, searched, and assigned, she watches every gesture closely. She studies the guards' faces, waiting for contempt to surface, for irritation to turn into violence. She braces herself for humiliation, for the small, unnecessary acts that assert dominance simply because they can. Instead, she encounters something that feels almost more disturbing: indifference tempered by discipline. Orders are given plainly. Instructions are repeated when misunderstood, not punished. The machinery of captivity operates smoothly, without spectacle. This absence of immediate brutality does not reassure her. On the contrary, it tightens the knot of dread. She assumes this restraint is temporary, a veneer that will soon crack. In her experience, patience from those in power is either a prelude to cruelty or a luxury afforded only until pressure demands release. She has seen how systems can delay violence without abandoning it. She has learned that waiting can be worse than pain, because it allows fear to grow unchecked. Inside the barracks, the atmosphere mirrors the camp itself. It is tense but quiet, filled with people who do not yet know how to behave in this unfamiliar version of captivity. Conversations are muted. Eyes flick toward the doors at every sound. Everyone seems to be listening for something that has not yet happened. The woman understands this silence. It is the sound of expectation, of bodies braced for impact that refuses to arrive. Her memories work against her. Each moment of calm recalls another place, another authority that promised order before delivering cruelty. She remembers how discipline was once presented as fairness, how patience masked calculation. Those memories insist that this camp cannot be different, that restraint is merely another weapon. The war has trained her not to trust moderation, because moderation has so often been withdrawn without warning. Yet time begins to pass and nothing breaks. Meals are distributed on schedule. Rules are enforced consistently. The guards remain distant but controlled, neither friendly nor hostile. There is no sudden escalation, no arbitrary punishment designed to remind the prisoners of their powerlessness. The camp seems designed not to provoke fear, but to contain it, to hold people in place without inflaming them. This design unsettles her more deeply than open brutality would have. The first night is the hardest. Darkness amplifies every sound, and she lies awake waiting for the moment when restraint will give way to violence. She imagines footsteps approaching, doors thrown open, names called out. Her body reacts as if the threat is imminent, muscles tense, breath shallow. But the night passes without incident. Morning arrives quietly, almost politely, and a routine resumes. This repetition begins to challenge her expectations in subtle ways. Not because the camp feels humane, but because it refuses to behave as anticipated. The system does not seem interested in her fear. It does not exploit it, escalate it, or even acknowledge it. This indifference to terror creates a strange emotional dissonance. She feels prepared for suffering that is not being delivered, like an instrument tuned for a note that never sounds. The camp's orderliness becomes its most disorienting feature. In a war defined by extremes, by the rapid collapse of norms, this place operates as if rules still matter. The woman struggles to reconcile this with everything she knows. She wonders whether this restraint is strategic, intended to extract something later, or whether it reflects a deeper commitment to control without cruelty. The uncertainty gnaws at her because it denies her the clarity of hatred. She realizes that she is not being treated as an enemy to be punished, but as a problem to be managed. This distinction is subtle but profound. Punishment implies emotion, anger, vengeance, ideological certainty. Management implies distance, procedure, limits. The camp does not appear designed to express moral judgment, only to enforce containment. For someone who has lived under regimes that weaponized morality, this neutrality feels unnatural. Still, she does not allow herself relief. Hope feels dangerous, even irresponsible. She has survived by assuming the worst and preparing for it. To accept that this place might operate differently would require her to loosen defenses she has relied on for too long. She tells herself that patience is merely another phase, that the real purpose of the camp will reveal itself soon enough. Yet even as she clings to this belief, something begins to shift. The absence of cruelty forces her to confront her own emotional reflexes. She notices how her body remains tense long after the threat has failed to materialize. She recognizes how deeply the war has conditioned her to expect harm as the default response to power. The camp, by refusing to confirm that expectation, exposes the extent of that conditioning. The first chapter of her captivity closes not with an event, but with a realization she cannot yet fully articulate. The danger she anticipated has not vanished, but it has been postponed indefinitely. In that postponement lies a quiet challenge, one that unsettles her more than violence ever could. The camp has not proven itself humane, but it has refused to prove itself cruel. In a world where cruelty has been the rule, that refusal feels like an anomaly, one that will demand reckoning in the chapters to come. Life inside the camp settles into a rhythm that feels both rigid and strangely hollow. Days are divided not by moments of fear or relief, but by schedules that repeat with mechanical precision. Wake-up comes at the same hour, meals arrive at predictable intervals, and movement is permitted and restricted according to rules that never seem to change. For the woman, this regularity is disorienting. She has learned to measure time by disruption, by raids, by sudden violence, by the constant recalculation required to stay alive. Here, time stretches evenly, offering no immediate threat and no promise of safety. She observes the guards carefully, studying them with the same intensity one might reserve for dangerous animals. She expects volatility, the sharp turn from restraint to cruelty that she has seen elsewhere. Instead, she finds consistency. Orders are delivered without raised voices. Corrections are made without insults. Even when rules are broken, the response is contained, procedural, and almost clinical. Punishment exists, but it is predictable, stripped of improvisation and emotion. This predictability unsettles her more than randomness ever did. In other camps she has heard about or survived near, authority fed on fear. Guards asserted power through spectacle, by humiliating prisoners publicly, by making examples of the weak, by reminding everyone that mercy was arbitrary and temporary. Here, authority appears uninterested in fear as a tool. Control is maintained through routine, not terror. The woman struggles to understand what this restraint serves. She searches for hidden motives, for signs that this patience is merely tactical. The camp's atmosphere seeps into the prisoners themselves. Conversations become cautious but less frantic. People speak in low voices, not because they are forbidden to speak, but because shouting feels unnecessary. The tension does not disappear, but it changes shape. Instead of sharp spikes of panic, there is a dull, persistent unease, fueled by uncertainty rather than immediate danger. Everyone is waiting for something, but no one knows what that something is. She notices how the guards rarely react emotionally, even when provoked. Complaints are ignored or addressed with the same neutral language. Requests are denied or approved without explanation, not to assert dominance but to preserve order. This emotional distance creates a barrier that is difficult to penetrate. It leaves no opening for negotiation, no weakness to exploit, but also no cruelty to resist. The woman finds herself disarmed not physically, but psychologically. Her instincts remain on high alert. Each morning she wakes prepared for the rules to change, for patience to be replaced by punishment. She expects the camp to reveal its true nature eventually. Yet day after day, the same restrained authority persists. The guards do not soften, but they do not harden either. This constancy begins to erode her certainty about what captivity must look like. The discipline of the camp is strict, but it is not personal. Infractions are recorded, not dramatized. There are no collective punishments designed to sow resentment among prisoners. Each person is treated as an individual unit within a system, not as a representative of guilt or ideology. This approach denies the woman the familiar narrative of oppressor and victim locked in emotional conflict. Instead, she is confronted with something colder and more difficult to interpret. She begins to realize that much of her suffering now comes not from what is happening, but from what she expects to happen. Her body reacts as if danger is imminent, even when her mind struggles to justify that reaction. This disconnect creates exhaustion. Fear without release becomes a heavy internal weight. The camp does not provide the relief of violence that allows terror to peak and then subside. It sustains a steady pressure that forces her to sit with her own anticipation. The woman reflects on how deeply the war has reshaped her understanding of authority. She has learned to equate power with cruelty, structure with abuse. In this camp, power manifests through restraint, and structure exists without overt malice. This contradiction unsettles her worldview. It suggests that brutality is not inevitable, even in war, and that possibility is difficult to accept because it challenges the logic that has helped her survive. She watches other prisoners grapple with the same confusion. Some respond with suspicion, others with cautious relief. A few attempt to provoke a reaction, perhaps seeking confirmation that their fear is justified. The guards do not take the bait. They respond with the same measured detachment, reinforcing the sense that emotional escalation is not part of the system. This refusal to engage emotionally denies the prisoners a familiar script. As days pass, the woman becomes acutely aware of how much energy she has spent preparing for suffering rather than enduring it. Her vigilance has no clear outlet. She cannot fight, flee, or submit in the way she once understood. The camp demands compliance, not surrender. It requires obedience, but not humiliation. This distinction forces her into a kind of psychological limbo. She begins to notice small details that would have been irrelevant elsewhere: the tone of voice used when giving instructions, the consistency of enforcement, the absence of insults. These details accumulate, not as proof of kindness, but as evidence of limits. The guards operate within boundaries that they do not cross. Those boundaries, though invisible, are rigid. They suggest a system governed by rules that apply even to those in power. This realization produces an uncomfortable shift. If cruelty is not being inflicted, then her fear has nowhere to anchor itself. She cannot direct her anger outward as easily. Instead, it turns inward, manifesting as frustration, confusion, and a sense of emotional displacement. The camp has not reduced her suffering. It has transformed it into something quieter and harder to name. At night, she reflects on how patience functions as a form of control. By denying prisoners the emotional release of confrontation, the camp keeps them contained not just physically, but psychologically. Yet this control feels different from domination. It does not seek to break spirits through terror. It seeks to manage behavior through predictability. The woman wonders whether this approach is more effective or simply more unsettling. Her memories of past violence begin to clash with her present reality. She replays moments where cruelty was used deliberately to assert superiority. Those memories feel sharper now, more vivid, because the contrast is so stark. The camp's restraint does not erase those memories, but it reframes them. It forces her to consider that the violence she endured was not unavoidable, but chosen. This thought is dangerous. It threatens to open a space for moral judgment that she has avoided. If cruelty was a choice, then responsibility exists. And if responsibility exists, then the war becomes not just a force of nature, but a series of decisions made by individuals and systems. The camp's patience quietly insists on this distinction, without ever stating it outright. By the end of this phase, the woman has not grown comfortable, nor has she grown trusting. But she has begun to sense that something fundamental is different. The camp does not confirm her expectations, nor does it reward her fear. It holds her in a state of unresolved tension, where anticipation slowly loses its grip. The cruelty she expected has not arrived, and its absence has begun to change her more profoundly than its presence ever could. This chapter closes with that unresolved unease. The camp remains a place of confinement, authority, and loss of freedom. But it is also a place where restraint governs action, and where patience quietly reshapes the emotional landscape. The woman does not yet understand the significance of this difference, but she feels its pressure building, setting the stage for a deeper reckoning ahead. As the days extend into weeks, the woman begins to realize that the most difficult burden she carries is no longer physical confinement, but the weight of anticipation itself. Her mind remains fixed on a future moment that refuses to arrive, a moment when the restraint she has witnessed will finally collapse into something recognizable and brutal. Each morning she wakes with the same expectation, and each night she lies down unsettled by its continued absence. The camp has become a place where fear is suspended rather than resolved, stretched thin across time until it loses its sharpness but not its presence. The emotional strain of this waiting begins to eclipse the memory of immediate violence. In places defined by cruelty, suffering announces itself loudly, leaving little room for doubt. Pain is clear, its source unmistakable. Here, uncertainty replaces pain as the dominant force. The woman finds herself exhausted not from abuse, but from vigilance that no longer serves a clear purpose. Her senses remain tuned for danger, yet danger refuses to declare itself. This constant readiness without release drains her in ways she did not anticipate. She becomes acutely aware of her own reactions, noticing how her body flinches at sounds that carry no threat, how her breath quickens during routine inspections that end without incident. These responses feel increasingly disconnected from reality, remnants of a survival mechanism forged under different conditions. The camp does not reinforce her fear, but it does not comfort her either. It allows her anxiety to echo back at her, unanswered. The guards continue their work with the same deliberate calm. They do not hurry, nor do they linger. Their presence feels functional rather than symbolic, as if they are maintaining a system rather than enforcing dominance. This distinction grows more unsettling over time. Without overt cruelty to resist, the woman struggles to define her role. Resistance requires an oppressor who reveals themselves clearly. Here, authority remains faceless, impersonal, almost bureaucratic. She begins to question whether the cruelty she anticipated was ever inevitable, or whether it was simply the most common expression of power she had encountered. The camp's refusal to indulge in brutality forces her to confront the possibility that violence is not an automatic consequence of control, but a decision layered on top of it. This realization unsettles her deeply, because it reframes her past suffering as something that could have been otherwise. Her internal conflict intensifies. Part of her wants the camp to reveal its cruelty, if only to validate her expectations and justify her fear. Another part, quieter but growing, begins to dread that revelation less. She notices moments where she almost forgets to be afraid, brief lapses where routine overtakes vigilance. These moments alarm her. They feel like betrayals of everything she has endured, signs that her defenses are weakening. Among the prisoners, the emotional landscape shifts as well. Conversations turn inward, reflective rather than reactive. People speak less about escape or punishment and more about memory, about who they were before the war reshaped their instincts. The absence of immediate cruelty creates space for thought, and thought brings its own discomfort. Without constant threat, there is room to feel loss, guilt, and unresolved grief. The woman finds herself revisiting moments from her past with new clarity. Scenes of violence she once accepted as inevitable now appear in a different light. She remembers the faces of those who inflicted pain, not as abstract forces of war, but as individuals who chose how far to go. The camp's restraint sharpens these memories, stripping away excuses she once relied on to make sense of them. This internal reckoning does not bring peace. It brings disorientation. If cruelty was not unavoidable, then survival becomes morally complicated. She wonders whether endurance required the dehumanization she witnessed, or whether that dehumanization served purposes beyond control. The camp does not offer answers, but its very existence poses the question relentlessly. Her sense of time becomes distorted. Days feel longer not because of suffering, but because of introspection. She measures time by thoughts rather than events, by internal shifts rather than external markers. This introspection feels dangerous. In other camps, reflection was a luxury few could afford. Here, it becomes unavoidable. The camp's stillness forces her inward, where unresolved emotions wait. She begins to understand that the camp's power lies not in what it does, but in what it withholds. By denying prisoners the clarity of cruelty, it denies them the simple narratives of victim and villain. This ambiguity destabilizes her sense of identity. She is no longer reacting, she is thinking. And thinking, after years of survival-driven instinct, feels like stepping onto unstable ground. At times, she resents the camp for this. Violence, at least, would confirm her expectations and allow her to retreat into familiar emotional defenses. Restraint offers no such refuge. It demands that she sit with uncertainty, that she confront her own assumptions without the relief of external confirmation. The camp becomes a mirror rather than a weapon, reflecting back her fear without amplifying it. She notices how discipline continues to be enforced without escalation. Even repeated infractions do not provoke rage. The system absorbs disobedience without visible emotional response. This containment of authority suggests limits imposed not by circumstance, but by principle. The idea that principle still operates within war unsettles her deeply. As this realization takes hold, she experiences a subtle but profound shift. Her fear begins to lose its urgency. It does not disappear, but it no longer commands her full attention. In its place emerges a quieter anxiety, one rooted in moral uncertainty rather than physical threat. She wonders what it means to survive in a world where restraint exists alongside violence, where different choices coexist under the same conditions. By the end of this chapter, the woman has not reached understanding, nor has she found comfort. But something irreversible has begun. The camp's patience has forced her into a confrontation with her own expectations, stripping them of certainty. She stands at the edge of a new awareness, one that challenges the narrative she has relied on to make sense of the war. The cruelty she anticipated has not arrived, and in its absence, her inner world has begun to shift in ways she cannot yet fully grasp, setting the stage for a deeper moral reckoning still to come. The longer she remains in the camp, the more the woman becomes aware that something essential has changed within her. It is not just the absence of violence that unsettles her, though that remains a constant source of confusion. It is not the strange, detached discipline of the guards either, or the quiet routine that stretches out endlessly before her. Rather, it is the way her own understanding of power, of control, and even of survival has begun to fray at the edges. The camp, with all its order and calm, has planted seeds of doubt in her that she now feels incapable of ignoring. These seeds are not about the system itself, but about herself, about what it means to survive, and what it costs when survival becomes not just a matter of physical endurance, but of moral negotiation. Each day that passes without incident forces her to confront her expectations anew. She finds herself noticing the smallest details, the way the guards exchange brief, almost impersonal glances as they monitor the prisoners, the steady and unremarkable distribution of food, the manner in which infractions are handled quietly but with no evident malice. At first, these were things she could dismiss, things that did not matter in the larger scheme of what was happening in the camp. But as time drags on, they begin to take on a greater significance, forming a pattern that challenges everything she thought she knew about captivity. It is as if the very structure of the camp is designed to break down the familiar frameworks of survival she has relied on. For so long, her mind had been attuned to the rhythms of cruelty. She had learned to read the signs of violence before it came, knowing when a guard's patience was wearing thin, or when a harsh word would quickly spiral into physical punishment. She had come to expect that suffering was the natural result of captivity, and that anyone in charge of a place like this would wield their power not just for control, but as an expression of personal frustration or ideological wrath. Here, that assumption is called into question. It is not that the camp is kind, it is simply that it is different from what she expected. The absence of cruelty does not feel like an act of mercy, but an act of something else entirely, an act of control that operates through silence and restraint rather than punishment and excess. It is within this silence that she begins to feel the full weight of her confusion. In the places she had been before, survival had been straightforward, even if brutal. There was always a clear adversary, always a target for her fear and anger. But in the camp, everything is more complicated. There is no visible enemy, no clear antagonist. The guards do not present themselves as aggressors, and the systems that govern the camp are impersonal, almost mechanical. And so, the woman finds herself asking a question that she had never considered before. What does it mean to be controlled when the control is not overt, not violent, but subtle, restrained, and systemic? How does one fight something that does not reveal itself as an enemy, but rather as a silent structure? This question lingers in her mind, gnawing at her until she feels something shift within her. The first cracks in her resistance appear not as acts of compassion or kindness, but as moments where her own instincts, honed by years of survival in violence and fear, begin to erode. There are moments when she forgets to brace herself, when she lets down her guard for just a second. The tension that has been her constant companion begins to loosen, and she finds herself breathing a little easier than she should. There is no attack, no violence to justify this release, just the quiet realization that she has stopped anticipating the worst. In the absence of fear, she begins to confront something much more insidious, the emotional fatigue of waiting, the toll of constant vigilance, and the realization that there is nothing left to resist. She sees this same shift happening around her, too. The other prisoners, once tense and on edge, have also started to settle into a new rhythm. The space between their conversations has become more comfortable, the pauses less filled with anxiety. They no longer speak in the fearful, guarded tones they once used. Instead, there is a kind of quiet resignation in their voices, as if they have come to accept the strange equilibrium of the camp. They no longer speak of escape or rebellion, but of memories and the distant hope of the war's end. Some of them, like the woman, still wonder if the cruelty is only being postponed, but there is no denying that the landscape of fear has shifted. The camp, in its quiet efficiency, has worn them down in ways they could not have anticipated. For the woman, this shift in the collective mood forces her to confront a deeper question. What is the cost of surviving in this way? The emotional toll of the camp's quiet authority weighs heavily on her. It is not the physical deprivation that threatens her. She can endure hunger, cold, and even pain. But this new kind of control, the kind that operates without drama, without fanfare, begins to take its toll on her mental state. The mind, she realizes, is a fragile thing, and when stripped of external forces to resist, it turns inward. There is nothing left to fight, no clear enemy to rail against. She finds herself reflecting on how much of her survival instinct had been fueled by opposition, by resistance to forces that made her feel helpless. But in the camp, resistance becomes less clear. There is no enemy to resist, and that leaves her feeling exposed in ways she has not anticipated. This realization forces her to confront an uncomfortable truth. The camp has not only controlled her body, it has controlled her mind too. By stripping her of external threats, it has forced her to look inward, to face her own inner contradictions and doubts. She has never been forced to question her survival tactics so directly. The structure of the camp, so meticulously devoid of cruelty, is forcing her to wrestle with the deeper, more philosophical aspects of what it means to endure. She has spent so long defining herself through her resistance to violence, through her ability to survive the harshest of conditions. Now, in a space that seems to offer none of those extremes, she is left to question whether she has truly survived or simply endured. The deeper she delves into this, the more the silence of the camp becomes both a challenge and a revelation. The camp's power lies not in what it does to her, but in what it makes her do to herself. She begins to see that survival in this place is not a matter of external force, but of internal negotiation. The real test of endurance is not whether she can withstand violence, but whether she can accept the absence of it. This realization is painful. She has built her identity around the idea that survival is an act of resistance, that the world is divided into those who impose suffering and those who endure it. But here, that binary breaks down. The camp does not impose suffering, it simply enforces a system of restraint. And in doing so, it leaves her no clear path to resistance, no narrative of victimhood or heroism to cling to. This new dynamic does not offer solace. It does not offer answers. But it forces the woman to reckon with herself in ways she never imagined. She realizes that the true force of the camp is not its physical control, but its emotional subtlety. It does not break her body. Instead, it tries to break her spirit, but in a quiet, slow, and insidious way that denies her the catharsis of rebellion or the clarity of victimhood. In this quiet destruction, she begins to understand that survival is not just about enduring pain, it is about enduring the uncertainty of a world that refuses to behave as expected. By the end of this chapter, the woman is no longer the same person who arrived at the camp. She is still here, still surviving, but she has begun to face something more difficult than physical captivity. She has begun to face the emotional and psychological captivity that comes with a system that offers no outlet for her fear and no enemy for her to fight. In this strange and silent control, she finds herself trapped in a new kind of war, one that she cannot see but feels deeply. It is a war that she never expected to face, but one that will shape her survival in ways she cannot yet fully comprehend. As the days continue to pass, the woman begins to recognize that the psychological toll of the camp has entered a new phase, one that both disturbs and confounds her. The absence of cruelty, which initially unsettled her with its ambiguity, has now become something else entirely, a profound, silent test of endurance. She no longer feels the need to brace herself for the violence that she had once expected. Instead, she finds herself grappling with a new kind of suffering, one that is quieter, subtler, but no less powerful. It is not the violence she feared, but the absence of it, the way the camp's orderliness and restraint have quietly eroded her defenses, forcing her to face a reality that feels entirely unfamiliar. In the beginning, the woman had believed that the camp structure was simply a facade, a temporary reprieve before the inevitable violence. But as the weeks stretch into months, she realizes that the camp is not waiting for an opportune moment to strike. It is not operating under the same logic she has known for so long. The guards continue to patrol the camp with an air of indifference, their eyes never lingering on the prisoners for too long, their voices monotone, their movements methodical. There is no cruelty in their actions, no attempt to intimidate, no hint of malice behind their eyes. It is as if they are performing a function rather than exerting power. This detachment, this refusal to engage emotionally, becomes an increasingly troubling force in the woman's life. In the past, she had known how to react to authority. She had learned how to anticipate the signs of cruelty, how to prepare herself for the worst. Her survival had been based on an understanding of power, on the ways it manifested in violence and force. But in this place, power is something different. It is not wielded for personal gain, nor is it an expression of anger or resentment. It exists without emotion, without a clear objective other than the maintenance of order. The woman's mind, so accustomed to associating power with anger, finds this form of control nearly impossible to grasp. She tries, at first, to convince herself that the lack of violence is merely a delay, that the camp's calmness is simply a lull before the storm. But as time goes on, it becomes clear that the storm she has been waiting for is not coming. There are no outbursts, no sudden flare-ups of rage or punishment. The system operates on a level of emotional neutrality that seems almost unnerving. It is this neutrality, this refusal to engage with the prisoners on a human level, that begins to wear away at her. The guards may not have been cruel, but they have also not been kind. They have offered no recognition of her suffering, no empathy, no acknowledgement of the loss that hangs over every prisoner in the camp. The woman's very humanity, her need to be seen, to be acknowledged, seems to have been suspended within the rigid structure of the camp. Over time, this emotional void starts to feel like an even greater form of control than physical violence ever could be. There is no room to resist, no outlet for her anger, no one to blame. The camp is not interested in her emotional state, it simply demands compliance. And it is this indifference to her suffering, this deliberate absence of any human touch, that starts to erode her sense of self. The woman begins to feel as if she is disappearing into the system, that she is becoming just another number in a machine that operates without regard for the individual. It is not that she is being abused, far from it, but rather that she is being erased, made insignificant by the steady, unyielding march of routine. She begins to understand, though reluctantly, that survival in this camp requires something more than mere endurance. It requires a kind of acquiescence, a submission not to the rules of the camp itself, but to the very structure of power that the camp represents. The system here does not require resistance because it does not provoke resistance. It is not interested in rebellion's inherent drama. It simply exists, a vast and impersonal force that does not need to dominate through violence because it dominates through the sheer weight of its consistency. And in this consistency, in this endless repetition of the same restrained actions, she finds herself questioning whether survival itself is worth the cost of this emotional suffocation. As the woman sits in the barracks at night, her thoughts turn inward, and she begins to consider a frightening possibility. Perhaps the camp's true power lies not in what it does, but in what it prevents her from doing. She realizes that in its refusal to engage with her emotions, in its constant, indifferent operations, the camp has gradually worn away her ability to express herself, to feel anger, to feel anything at all. The fear that once ruled her has been replaced with a kind of numbness, an emotional exhaustion that she cannot shake off. It is as if she has been drained of her ability to feel deeply, to care, to be human in a way that acknowledges her own suffering. The camp's impersonal discipline has slowly, almost imperceptibly, silenced her. In this silence, the woman confronts an unbearable truth. She has begun to internalize the camp's detachment. She has stopped waiting for a confrontation, stopped expecting the violence she once thought was inevitable. She has accepted the camp's presence in her life, not because she has reconciled with it, but because it has become the only reality she knows. This acceptance feels like a kind of surrender, but it is not the kind of surrender that comes with being broken. Instead, it is the surrender of someone who has ceased to expect change, who has stopped hoping for any kind of intervention. In this sense, the woman's survival has become a quiet form of complicity, an unwilling alignment with the system she once resisted. As her mind continues to wrestle with these new realizations, she starts to notice something even more troubling. There are moments when she no longer questions the camp's authority, no longer feels the need to push against it. She has become so attuned to its rhythms, so accustomed to the way it operates, that she has begun to lose her sense of resistance altogether. The woman, who once viewed every authority figure with suspicion and anger, now feels as though she is simply moving through the motions of captivity without truly engaging with it. She no longer cares about fighting back, not because she has given up, but because she has stopped seeing any point in it. This emotional resignation brings with it a disturbing sense of clarity. She realizes that the real test of survival here is not about withstanding pain or physical harm. It is about maintaining the will to fight against an invisible, pervasive force that wears you down, not with violence, but with indifference. The camp has not broken her, but it has made her question the value of resistance itself. It has forced her to confront a new kind of survival, one that requires her to live within a system that offers no moral clarity, no outlet for her anger, and no clear enemy to resist.